All right, Bob Wankel from Crossing Broad is going to talk a little Phils with us here. All right, how do you read into Matt Klentak stepping down? I mean, they didn't want to fire him because they owe money. They're going to, Middleton said, oh, well, we have a guy who we value. He can provide something for us. I don't know, once you're the GM and then you get demoted, how much input you're really going to have. But what's next? I think there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered. Bob Wankel, Crossing Broad, covers the Phillies, and he joins us now to try to help us make some sense of what happened on Saturday. John Middleton spoke, and, I don't know that you would leave very satisfied with some of the things he said, Bob. What do you read into Klentak stepping down? Does he do this on his own accord?
No, he did not do this on his own accord, at least my interpretation of it. I think that it was basically like, hey, listen, you're no longer going to be the GM. You can do it on your own. We can package it one way, or we can just say you're fired. And I do think what you just said to your point about how, there may have been a consideration that we owe this guy multiple millions of dollars. We're an organization that's looking to make cuts throughout on both the baseball and non-baseball side of things, and we can't justify just parting ways with this guy that's owed all this money. So maybe that played a factor in it. But no, I mean, I think that he was essentially removed from that position, however you want to phrase it.
Ned Rice is now the interim, but that doesn't mean that they're going to replace him for the next season. Was that the read that you got on it?
Yeah, you know what? I did take that away from what John Middleton said. To be perfectly honest with you, I think that he made the point about it may be difficult to hire. It may be difficult to conduct interviews. It may be difficult get somebody acquainted with the organization the way that you would want to throughout this process. And, if you're going to make that point on Saturday, I think you do it for a reason. You could say whatever you want about John Middleton, but he's a smart guy in that he's very calculated. And I think that he talked about the possibility of Ned Rice being this team's GM through the 2021 season because there is a possibility of it. Maybe they go out and maybe they do hire somebody, but I don't think that that's totally off the table at this point. And I know that fans won't be thrilled with that because I think the way that is interpreted by a lot of people, both observers of the team and fans alike, is that you're just replacing one guy who shares very similar views, or with another guy who shares very similar views. And that's troublesome because I think it's just very apparent at this point that the Phillies need a fresh voice and they need a fresh perspective. And I don't know that Ned Rice is that guy.
I don't even know where to begin because my blood is boiling so much thinking about this. Saturday I was all pissed off about it, and then the Eagles won, and I got excited, and then here we are having this conversation again. So I am not happy. But, oh, man. The COVID thing being an issue, I understand why it would be hard to have conversations, but I feel if you look at what's going on around the league, specifically Tampa or other markets that don't have $200 million to spend, it shouldn't be that hard to pick up the phone and talk to them or Zoom them or do something where you can at least have these conversations. COVID should not be an excuse on not being able to pick up the phone, call Tampa, call these teams that have so much success with not even close to the amount of money being spent. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think if you want to get this done, you can find ways to do it. Yeah, I mean, obviously COVID-19 presents some obstacles, but if you're ambitious enough and you're determined to go get a certain guy and you've got your short list of candidates after you do your internal and external research, you should be able to go out and get the guy that you want regardless of whether or not COVID, does present obstacles. So, yeah, I'm in total agreement with you. I thought it was a little bit of a cop-out. I think it's a sort of a way of just taking some of the accountability and some of the urgency out of the situation. And I don't think that people really are buying that. I don't know if either of you got to listen to the press conference in its entirety, but I thought, for the lack of a better word, it was a disaster and borderline insulting. I thought that there were some very worthwhile and very deserving questions that were asked during that 35-minute plus session. And I thought that John Middleton was frankly condescending in some of his answers. Talking about Andy McPhail. And, there was a reporter that basically said, hey, listen, this is somebody that has not had a ton of success now in over 2 decades, hasn't been a part of a winning organization. And
he won two World Series, right?
I mean, that's preposterous.
I wasn't even born yet.
Yeah, Andy McPhail last won a World Series when I was 6 years old in 1991. I mean, it's ridiculous. And to just be so condescending with your answer. I mean, and that's my issue. And it's been my issue with the Phillies really for multiple years now. And I thought it was on full display Saturday and last year during the Gabe Kapler press conference when they fired him. It's just this idea of like, how dare you ask us these questions, or how dare you question, or how dare you not understand what we're trying to do? And I'm sorry, but this is a team that has spent a lot of money and hasn't made the postseason now in 9 years. And I think sometimes we're maybe a little bit too polite. I think maybe a little bit too careful with how we ask questions and go about things. And I just thought it was a joke. And this organization's inability to deliver a message from its highest front office and ownership personnel is baffling. And the Phillies have a great PR staff, great people that work with the media, but when it comes to their messaging, it may be worse than their player development.
Wow, that's saying a lot because it's been 100 years. It's a 100-year problem, this developing and drafting. And, I mean, look, when you think about Matt Klentak stepping in 5 years ago, we knew that there was going to be a process, and out of all of it, we got Spencer Howard, who we don't really know much about at this point, and Alec Boehm, who looks to be tremendous, but we saw Rhys Hoskins come out to a good start as well and then, dip off a bit. But this is going to be, when I look at this process right now with the prospects, this is going to be a large window. It's not a fix overnight. You're going to have to go back and redraft and redo everything and restart and pick up where you left off 5 years ago before you even drafted Matt Klentak, to the point where I feel bad for Bryce Harper, because I would have to imagine he's sitting there right now thinking, wow, I got suckered.
Yeah, if Bryce Harper were being totally truthful, I don't think this is what he envisioned. I think there's a lot of things he likes with the organization and city, but I don't think this is quite what he had in mind when he signed here. Now, the one thing that John Middleton said that I agreed with is that the Phillies have had a 100-year problem of not being able to draft and develop players properly within their system. I mean, he's right about that. And he was kind of quick to say, like, listen, our fix here long-term has to come from within. It can't just be throwing money at every single problem. But the issue is for this team, where it's at now, after you go out and you sign a Zach Wheeler, after you go out and sign a Bryce Harper, and you trade what you traded to get, JT Realmuto here, they're sort of in limbo at this point where, yeah, you can make an argument for that. No, you can't just going out and signing guy after guy after guy, but in order to make those moves make sense, I don't know how you don't continue to spend money. And I guess that all comes back to the JT Realmuto situation, which I know is what's really got everybody upset. And I think it's utterly preposterous that they could have traded Sixto Sanchez and not been able to hammer out a long-term deal with JT Realmuto. But it certainly feels like if you would have asked me 2 months ago what's going to happen here, I would have said 80, 90% chance they get it done. Maybe some other third-party team comes in and blows them out of the water, but they're going to get it done. And now, if you're asking me for odds, I'd tell you that maybe I would say yes, they re-signed like plus 120. I mean, I feel like it's the underdog scenario here at this point. I think it's more likely that he walks than it is he resigns at this point. But you need a center fielder. I think you need a shortstop. I think you need a catcher. And so how are you going to compete in 2021 if you let Realmuto walk and you're starting to create more holes, more uncertainty? It just doesn't line up with the trajectory of where this organization's supposed to be. And they're in a really bad spot right now.
We're talking with Bob Wankel from Crossing Broad as the Phillies and Matt Klentak steps down. He's still with the organization. Ned Rice is the interim here. Andy McPhail, as you mentioned, it was a kind of a condescending moment in the press conference. He's still the president, but a perplexing comment was that he was going to be more involved on the baseball side. What was he doing? Selling ads? I mean, what the heck was he doing?
Yeah, I think he had input with baseball decisions, but I do think by and large he was there more just as a support system for Matt Klentak. I think that the idea was to develop Matt, really let him take charge of the organization. It wasn't to have Andy McPhail and all of his successes, I kind of say that in air quotes, but, to have him not loom over Matt Klentak. And so I think that Andy McPhail didn't have as much to do with the baseball decisions as people think. There was an article that came out, a report from The Athletic a couple weeks ago about how it was Andy McPhail who basically sent the memo out to some of the team's employees about how, there might be a necessity for scaling back salary and cutting positions. And I think that he has a lot to do with organizational operation and how the business elements of the organization are run and less about really the baseball, the drafting, I don't think that it was Andy McPhail who was pulling the trigger on deadline deals or making decisions to target certain free agents. I think he had less to do with that than people think. And I'm okay with that. Like, you don't need to – I know we all want our pound of flesh and that you want to see all these guys get fired, but you've got to have a plan in place. And it doesn't seem like the Phillies have a firm plan in place, so I don't know that firing Andy McPhail when I don't believe he's going to be here beyond 2021 anyway really is all that necessary. Like, the Phillies aren't a bad spot because they didn't fire Andy McPhail this weekend. I kind of almost think it's a nothing point from a baseball perspective, unless you really just want the guy to have absolutely nothing to do with selecting who the general manager is going to be.
Well, that's why I think it's interesting, because you're pretty much open to saying, hey, when his contract's over, he's out of here, yet I really want to get him to help me pick the next GM. It's like, I don't know, does that kind of conflict itself a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe, but I think at the same time, Andy McPhail has baseball contacts. I think that he can maybe help kind of cultivate some of those conversations that you might want to have in both hiring a GM. And I do think it's possible that the Phillies kind of create a president of baseball ops a type of title for someone that might possibly lure in different candidates that wouldn't just simply make a lateral move to become the team's general manager. And, we did talk at the beginning of this call about some of the difficulties with COVID and maybe getting guys in a room together to sort of hash out details and have these conversations that you need to have. And, perhaps Andy McPhail with his contacts and his experience might help kind of, facilitate that process. And so, I don't think that any of us know with any certainty to the point where we can say that having Andy McPhail here is going to be problematic for this franchise or that he's going to further damage this franchise. I just think that may be a little bit unfair. That being said, I totally understand why people feel like that, because he doesn't inspire a ton of confidence. And frankly, the results here have been very underwhelming. So, yeah, I can understand why people want to see wholesale changes and just blow them all out. But I just don't know how much it really, truly matters. And it could be helpful, actually.
Bob.
Look at me defending Andy McPhail.
How dare you? Today, Rhys Hoskins had Tommy John's 4 to 6 months. Number one, was he a tradable piece that now can't be traded? And number two, should they try to trade him to try to get any sort of arms to help out? Because Alec Boehm obviously could play first base. You got an option there. So I don't know what the DH is for next year. Do they have a decision on the DH in the National League next year? But is Hoskins the most tradable piece, and should they try to move him?
Yeah, I would have said yes, but I don't think that you're going to get the return you need now for a guy who really struggled at the beginning of the season and was so good for the last month or so. It's still a really small sample size of success. That's a pretty serious injury. Yes, it's not going to keep him off the field, I don't think, too much in 2021, but you do wonder about his overall effectiveness coming off of that surgery. We've seen in the past that guys can get on the field, but they struggle a little bit at first. Didi Gregorius went through that, and so I would have said that Rhys Hoskins was a prime trade candidate, coming into this offseason. But in light of this injury, I don't foresee that. I just don't think you can get the return that you're going to need. And I think kind of speaks to the problem that we just talked about. The Phillies are in a spot where they need to cut costs, and eventually they're going to have to make a decision on Rhys Hoskins in his future here. But they don't need to make that decision yet. They can still get fairly solid, production out of this guy at not much of a cost. And I just don't think that the idea of trading him makes a ton of sense now in light of this injury. But had he not gotten injured, when I talked about, I would tell people, like, what's the offseason plan? How do you take the next step? Having meaningful trade discussions about Rhys Hoskins was one of them, but I think that this surgery and this 4 to 6 month timeline that he's on is going to preclude that from happening this winter. Now, if he comes back, has a really good start in 2021, I think maybe you revisit that idea.
If JT Realmuto does leave, do you think that gives the opening to re-sign Didi Gregorius, or do you think he's out as well regardless?
Yeah, I think it makes it more likely that Didi Gregorius resigns here. I think they really like him. I know Joe Girardi loves him. You at some point have to not only keep your right fielder content. We always talk about, the Phillies have to do this so they don't lose Bryce Harper. That you don't want him to start questioning the franchise and its overall direction. I think you brought Joe Girardi in here with an expectation of, hey, we're going to give you a winning team, and we're going to give you the pieces that you need. Now, you take the production of Didi Gregorius out of the lineup and JT Realmuto, and I just don't – that's just not the path this team was on. And just because, you pick a path doesn't mean that you can't walk back a little bit, but they would be taking a substantial step backward if they did that. I mean, unless they somehow brought in Trevor Bauer and they got a little bit creative with some other moves, but I don't see the Phillies doing that. That's not what this team does, and I would be shocked if that happens. So to answer your question in a long-winded manner, yeah, I think it would make it much more likely that Gregorius is back.
All right, well, they have Ned Rice running the show right now. This offseason is going to be kind of interesting, as Middleton said, with COVID. Obviously, their biggest problem was the bullpen. How do you fix that in an offseason? I mean, you need like 5 arms. Right? I mean, so what is the plan of action to try to get this team towards the playoffs with the uncertainties that are out there?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is that you don't know how the Real Muto situation is going to play out. So, for instance, if you go back 2 off seasons ago where they had to wait, and they finally got to March and things finally came together with Bryce Harper, that's great, right? But they didn't know what the rest of their financial situation was going to look like, and couldn't maybe make some of those other mid-level moves that you wanted to make. And I think it's very clear that John Middleton is concerned about revenue. He made that point the other day. Was very quick to make that point. So the longer the JT Realmuto situation draws on, the harder it's going to become to fix your bullpen. And so I know that people don't want to hear this, but if Realmuto is not going to be back, it would behoove the Phillies to understand that and come to that understanding very quickly this offseason, because if this drags on and they think we got a chance, and they miss out on maybe some of these other corresponding moves that they could have made, or moves they would have made in lieu of signing Real Muto, that's going to be a disaster. How do you fix the bullpen? I don't know. I don't know how you can. I don't know how you can make so many moves and the moves necessary to change this thing in one season. I think you just have to find guys that throw the ball hard. I know that sounds ridiculous, but this team has had an infatuation with trotting out relievers that throw 92, 93 miles an hour. You've got to find some high upside arms, and you maybe got to go out and find 1 or 2 guys with a little bit of a track record, but you have to have less David Robertson and more guys with some ceiling, with that have a little bit more youth, a little less tread on the tires, and have a little life in their arm. They just don't have enough bullpen pieces with meaningful, legit life in their arm. And I think that's the biggest thing.
All right, Bob Wankel, Crossing Broad. There's so much the Phillies need to try to figure out this offseason, but the big move started with Matt Klentak stepping down. Ned Rice is the interim GM, and we're not sure if they're going to hire someone or not. We'll keep our eye on that. Bob, this is going to be a very, very interesting offseason. So we'll see what ends up happening, pal. We'll keep in touch.
Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you soon.